Hey Jags, I hope all preparation for nationals are going really well right now. And this is part one of a two-part series that I'm going to be doing today over basically what's to be looking for when it comes to the different types of debate at nationals. The first type, this one is about Lincoln Douglas, the other one's about public forum. My goal is to kind of break down the topic so that you have an option to kind of think through exactly what kind of arguments are going to be made, the types of arguments that I think make the most sense based on the judging that I think is going to be there, and then possibly a couple of tricks that are already developed. So with that said, if you don't know what the topic is yet for nationals, let me kind of start with that. In Lincoln Douglas, the current topic is resolve that the United States use of targeted killing in foreign countries is unjust. And let me just kind of start there by breaking down that topic. Normally, if I was here with you, I would be saying things like, what do you think some of these words mean? And we would kind of talk through that. But since we're not, let me just kind of break each of those parts down. So when it talks about targeted killing, one of the things that you should be thinking about in the context of that is with drones. So a drone is an instrument that is flown without a person actually in it, that looks to kill one or maybe two specific people within the context of the countries that the United States believes that it's at war with, or within groups that it's trying to attack. Now, one of the complications with this is that there's a lot of people who conflate two different terms: the term targeted killing and the term assassination. Now, when we think about an assassination, what we're talking about is when someone kills a leader of another country or a leader of a party. In the United States, you might be able to think about through history a lot of major leaders who were assassinated. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy were assassinated, they were killed. And I think that that's some of this conversation. But when it's talking about targeted killings, it's not talking about a specific person going after another specific person, which is kind of the traditional definition of an assassination. Rather, it's talking about a military strike from the United States against a specific person within that country. And so you might think about it in terms of, is it okay for the United States to send its military in to kill one person in another country, or especially to kill a leader or a person who is in charge of an organization? This became really part of the conversation post 9/11, as George W. Bush and others were really trying to figure out how to stop Al-Qaeda through trying to kill people like Osama bin Laden. And so that really became a lot of the conversation that was going on. There's some conversation about whether or not that happened in the capture of Saddam Hussein, but ultimately it's much bigger than just the conversation about one or two leaders. But the topic asks if it's a justifiable position or not, when it asks if the United States should be allowed to conduct targeted killings in foreign countries. And so when you're thinking about that, the question isn't like, is it okay if the United States captures a person from another country and brings them over? But rather, is it okay if the United States goes into another country, especially if that country is the country where the leader is the leader of that country, and then kills that leader? So I think there's a lot of area in this topic to kind of be thinking about. It is a morally ambiguous space where there's a lot of complications when it comes to talking about different things. And so let's start off just kind of talking about what I think a lot of people are going to be doing on the topic, both for the affirmative and for the negative. Okay, so first of all, let's just talk about it in the context of, on the affirmative, I think what a lot of people are going to do is they're going to talk about how either targeted killing set up a problematic international regime where if it's okay for one country to go into another country and kill that country's leader, then wouldn't it also be okay for other countries to come into the United States and kill our leader? Or wouldn't it be okay for any country to literally invade any other country and kill their leader? I think that that's one of the directions that a lot of affirmative teams might go with. And I think that the literature based on that is pretty clear. I think there's a lot of people who will say that that's kind of the base of it. On the affirmative, you might see people arguing for deontology, saying that there are certain things that you should never do, for example, to kill people because it is morally unjustifiable. And they might say things like, in the context of the war where people have come in and said that they're trying to do that from a military perspective, maybe that's okay. But the leader of that country, who's often getting the targeted killing, is not someone who is engaging necessarily in some form of a military attack. They're not a military person. They are a public person, but they are not involved in the military. And so there's some complications like that where I think a lot of the affirmative teams are going to be kind of thinking through things. For the negative, I think a lot of teams are going to talk about how the targeted killings are not only justified but potentially good because they reduce the killings on other people. So when there's just one person that you're targeting as opposed to like blowing up a city or blowing up a larger area, it sometimes at least is supported in the literature that just killing one person is good because it's less casualties. And so you might see things on the negative values like utilitarianism or consequentialism. You might even hear examples, and I even kind of hesitate to even talk about these, but I could see some negatives talking about, for example, how would it have been acceptable morally to kill Hitler to save the Holocaust from happening? Would that have been a good choice? And so I think that is kind of a broad overview of what the topic is talking about. I'm going to pause here for myself for just a couple of seconds so that if you want some time to process that out loud, you can. And then I'm going to talk about the two different kind of strategies that I've looked at when it comes to the practice cases, which are on the drive. So if you want to hit pause and talk about it amongst yourselves, now would be a great time. I'll be back. I'm going to wait about 10 seconds. Great. I hope that you had the opportunity to kind of think through how that plays out as far as the general space. Let's talk for a few minutes now about what I think would be a good strategy for the affirmative and what I think would be a good strategy on the negative. Of course, these are my ideas. These are not necessarily the ideas that everyone should do, but I think they're pretty intelligent. I did them myself. So if you go to the drive, you'll notice that I put together an affirmative case and a negative case as well. Let me just kind of talk through how these play out. So the affirmative case, it starts off with a quotation from one of the Apple co-founders, Steve Wozniak, who's oftentimes known as the Woz. He talks about how we should never trust a computer that you can't throw out a window. And the reason that I kind of put this in here is that a lot of the affirmative case is going to be talking about the context of artificial intelligence. And one of the directions that drone strikes are moving toward right now is toward artificial intelligence, where the drone hovers around places and makes decisions at the last minute based on algorithms and other computer programs of exactly who to kill and what's the acceptable loss range. And so the value that the affirmative says is that we should think about justice. It is a pretty common value here on this topic because the topic says that it is unjust, which means that if as the affirmative you can prove that not doing it leads to better justice, then it's probably better. The value criteria talks about reliable knowledge. And this is going to be a pretty important argument as you are framing the debate, Because what you're wanting to say here is that in order for justice to happen, we actually need to know all the facts. Think about it in the terms of a courtroom, maybe, for example. If someone just said, hey, this person did something, this person killed someone, this person stole something, but there weren't any facts, you would feel like it was unjust if you were punished. If you think about it in this term, if one of your teachers or one of your classmates brought you to Miss Olson and said that you had taken a bunch of stuff, but they didn't have any information about it and you weren't allowed to present your side, then you would complain that it was unfair or that it was unjust. And that's kind of the value criteria here, is that when we're asking ourselves questions, we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So we need to be able to look at each targeted killing and say, was it justifiable? Was it possible to do that? And when we're asking this question, the Girard evidence that I put in there talks about how that's a key piece for epistemology. Now, epistemology is a huge word. Basically, it means how do we know what we know, right? How do you know that the shirt that I'm wearing right now is blue? Well, it's probably because over the course of your educational system, you had in kindergarten or before that, someone said this is a blue crayon, or you had a picture of something that was blue and your eyes matched that word and that concept of blue to this color of blue, and you've been able to kind of engage in that since then. Now, Girard says that when it comes to justice, that we have to have all of the facts collected, and in order to be able to understand justice at all. So the affirmative says we have to have all of the information. We have to be able to evaluate what's actually there. And that's going to be pretty important when we get into the conversation about artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence, by definition, removes the human element, where people are able to look through things and make determinations based on what's morally just or unjust. If you look at contention 1, the subpoint A piece of evidence talks about how that right now they are targeting the drone debate as targeted killing, and that's bad because they hide a bunch of things because, well, we didn't really see it, and it allows things to escape scrutiny, which means that people aren't really examining what's going on. That helps you just kind of frame the fact that the current AI, the current drone situation is not really on the up and up. And then on subpoint B, it talks about how drones will be moving toward targeted killing and towards AI specifically, and how that's actually a bad problem because it means that it could be turned not only internationally but also domestically. This evidence is actually pretty good. It talks about how the drones would decide who to kill with little to no human involvement, opening the door to mass killings with minimal accountability or transparency. And so if you think about it, part of the reason that we don't kill more people when we go to war is that people have to kill the other people. And so that there's some kind of a human element there that stops things from being a problem. It's kind of like this. When hunting used to happen and you had to go out and kill animals with like a knife, or maybe a bow and arrow where you had to physically remove the arrow out of the animal that you killed, there were a lot less animals that were killed for sport or just for fun, as opposed to now when someone can just shoot a gun at it, and if they, in the United States, and if they kill it, or if they don't, whatever, who cares? There's not really that connection because it's distanced, okay? And so that's kind of what it talks about here, is that right now, the way that targeted killings work when it's not done by computers is that the people have to actually be involved. They have to see the people who are being killed, and that's actually reducing the number of casualties, which is good. But if drones were allowed to do it without anything that they were having to think about specifically, then it could be really problematic. So contention 2 talks about drone morality, and it just says that first in subpoint A that the use of AI drones eliminates any of the human interaction with it, which is really important. What it talks about here that's really interesting is that what it actually would mean is that drones would stop moving towards killing and start moving towards extermination. And so they would kill anything that they thought was a target. The end impact of that would probably be an extinction of humanity level event, which I think is pretty easy for you to frame as being a bigger impact, something that we would have to avoid for a question of justice. And then in subpoint B, the evidence talks about how, just like how nuclear weapons change the conversation about militaries, drones would do the same thing. And so what it does is it helps you to kind of make your impact even bigger when you're trying to compare in the last rebuttal. So whatever the negative says, a lot of this advantage a lot of this contention is trying to help you frame your affirmative against their negative. I think that's going to be pretty compelling to your judges, because you want to be thinking about how does your last speech work. Now, contention 3 is one of those where if there's time, this is a fantastic contention. But if you don't have time, don't worry about contention 3. If you do have time, if it fits, if it makes sense to you, that's fantastic. I think it will help you weigh your case against the negative. But here's kind of the framing of it. It talks about how AI drones are actually a big part of capitalism and how capitalism is bad. So in subpoint A, it talks about how that the AI drones right now are really what Google is pushing towards. It's really what a lot of other companies are pushing towards. My guess is that if you watch the Google I/O discussion this week in Mountain View, California, you'll see them talk a lot about artificial intelligence and how that plays out. I think that one of the pieces of this is that there is a reality where there's a profit motif, where companies are trying to develop drones that can pick out specific people or do specific things. Our argument is going to be that allows them to target killings, and that actually will lead to more businesses trying to do that. Now, you might think inherently that it's a good idea for businesses to compete like that, but the subpoint B evidence talks about how ultimately that type of competition is unjust, because what it does is that we can't evaluate whether or not things are actually just, because the only thing that we care about then is whether or not they make money. And so when you're asking yourself the question about, is it a good idea for there to be targeted killings, or is it just that the fact that AI is the main way that this is happening makes that something that we can't evaluate as being just or unjust. All right? That's the affirmative. I'm going to, again, pause for about 10 seconds and let you discuss it before I move on to the negative. Excellent. So finalizing the negative here, I put a couple of different things in here that I think will be pretty helpful, but I want to make sure that you kind of understand the framing here. I did not put any kind of an introduction on this case. Those are things that you'll have to kind of work through based on exactly what you want to do. So the value that I've put in here on the negative is talking about protecting citizens. Our argument, I think, on the negative should be that the question should be, should the United States do it and or not? And that the way that they should evaluate whether or not targeted killings are good is whether or not they're good for the citizens of the U.S., because that's really the constituency or the people that the United States should care about in the context of this topic. The way that this evaluates through a value criteria is through what's called the rule of proportionality. If you read, one of the terms that you're going to find a lot in this conversation is the question of just war theory. JUSTWARTHEORY. Just war theory is a question about when it makes sense to go to war, because the argument is that there are times when war makes sense, right? Like if it means the extermination of the planet, or if it means we kill a few people, then maybe killing a few people is justified. But the negative here argues that the way that we evaluate whether or not it's good for citizens is through asking if it proportionally makes sense. If killing one person saves the life of many, then maybe in the context of targeted killings that makes some sense. The evidence here is actually pretty good. The author of this evidence, both of the authors are professors of law at Harvard, and they discuss how targeted killings may be justified because they stop more people from dying, which is probably a good thing. Contention 1, I want to talk about this a little bit. This is kind of the trick. And if you'll notice here, there's only one contention on the negative. The reason is I want you to have plenty of time to attack the affirmative case, because the affirmative case is going to have a lot of things that they talk about, and I want to make sure that you have kind of an argument that sets the rest of the debate up without getting things too complicated. So on contention 1, the question here is war inevitable? And by that I mean, is there any way to avoid war? The subpoint A piece of evidence says no, that actually war is going to happen, that people are going to have conflicts with each other. It traces a lot of human history and says, look, people are always going after each other. Like they're trying to get better land, or someone has better access to ports, or someone has better access to other things, okay? And so there is always going to be this place where wars and conflicts are going to happen. Now, that's important because the subpoint B evidence kind of helps you frame how this works out. It talks about how that the alternative to targeted killing then is not killing anyone. The alternative, or if the affirmative doesn't defend targeted killing, if they say no targeted killing, what you say on the negative is then what you have to defend is untargeted killing. You have to defend the ability of all people to be attacked, which this evidence talks about what that would look like, okay? It says that the alternative targeted killing would either be where you just have mass casualty terrorism or cruise missiles. Examples of that would be where people just kill a lot of people all at once without targeting a specific person. I guess it would be like this. If the teacher in your classroom said, okay, we're going to target the person who misbehaved to try to make class better, and said, okay, if you talk out of turn or if you're doing the wrong things right now, then what we're going to do is we're going to suspend you. That would be a targeted suspension, a targeted dynamic within the context of the class. The alternative is not that people in general are going to start behaving super well. That's just not going to happen, and we understand that. So the alternative that the negative says the affirmative is locked into is non-targeted killing, or non-targeted punishment, where the teacher would say, okay, well, since one person's talking, we're just going to give everyone in the class an F. Everyone suffers. And hopefully that will kind of play things out. The negative is, I think, pretty fair here to say that that's not just, and that's not a good place because it's not fair to anyone. And so what you say then is then in subpoint C that targeted killings actually mean less people die. Okay, so if instead of saying when there's a major leader of a bad organization, instead of just going and targeting them, if we did the alternative, which is just to say drop a bomb on the entire city, we end up with examples like Hiroshima or Nagasaki, where the US government decided that instead of killing one specific person, they were going to take out an entire city. And on the negative, you get to say that's really bad, which I think is a really good position for you to be on here on the negative. And just saying, look, like when we ask ourselves the question about justifiability, what we really need to think about is killing one person better than killing a lot of people? Not is killing one person better than killing zero? It's really important on the negative that you frame the debate that way. In fact, if I were thinking about my negative rebuttal right now, what I would want to start, the thing that I would want to say at the very beginning is, at the end of the debate, the question is not, is killing one person better than killing zero? Because of course, we would all say that killing zero people is better. The question is killing one person better than killing a lot of people? And if you believe at the end of the debate that killing one person is better than killing a lot of people, then it is justifiable for you to vote negative. And that's kind of the direction that I would go then with the rest of my rebuttal on the negative. So, like I said, the subpoint C evidence talks about how it would kill less civilians, which going back to the value and value criteria that we talk about at the beginning of the case. Okay, with that said, I think I've kind of talked through about what the cases look like and about what some of the other pieces look like on the topic in general. Of course, if you have questions, Miss Olson is amazing. Be sure to listen to some of the advice that she has. If you have questions about the cases, feel free to email me and ask me. I'll be happy to try to be available as often as I can to try to answer those questions. Miss Olson also knows how to get a hold of me through WhatsApp and some other things. And so if you have questions, make sure you let me know. Like I said, as far as things that if I were you, I would be reading in the meantime, I would read anything I could find about drones, anything I could find about targeted killing, and just make sure that you understand the concepts of just war theory. I think it'll really help you out. With that said, if you need anything else, let me know, and I will see you all at Nationals. Go Jags!